Hello and welcome to part 2 in a series of videos that I'm putting out where I break down all the fights taking place this weekend at UFC 238 from a betting perspective. Now I've already covered 3 fights on this card which you can find in part 1 in this series of videos. I will leave a link to that in the description below. And in today's video I'll be going through another 3 fights including the main event between Marlon Moraes and Henry Cejudo. But before we get into breaking down these fights, there are a few things that I need to talk to you about. The first is the live stream that I will do this Saturday on Fight Day if every single video that I put out this week gets 400 likes per video, which is around about 10% of the total number of views each video will get. Now part 1 is struggling a little bit on the likes front, so if you would like me to do that live stream where I go through all the fights taking place at UFC 238 and try and find you a decent prop bet for every single one of these fights, please go back, watch part 1 and hit the like button. Please also hit the like button on this video. All we need is 400 likes per video and I will do that live stream. And like I say, in the live stream I'll go through each one of these fights and try and find a decent value prop, and I will also answer all your questions from the live chat Q&A. In last week's live stream I didn't have enough time to get through all the questions because there were so many of them, so I will allocate more time to doing a longer live stream this week. So if you want that, please hit the like button. And the prop bets have been doing okay over the last few weeks. I think on the event the week before last, RDA versus Kevin Lee, I think you would have made quite a big profit if you would have tailed all my props on that event. And I can't actually remember all the props we had on this card, but I'm pretty sure we had Amirkhani to win in round 2, which would have been about 7.5 to 8.5. We also had Landsberg to win by decision, which would have been about 5.42. So even just those 2 winning bets, if you bet the same stake on each one of my props, would have put you at break even. And like I said, I can't remember what all the props were, but I'm sure at least 1 or 2 other props hit, which would have put you in profit. Although don't quote me, because like I say, the live stream's a bit crazy. I'm not really keeping track of all the stuff that I'm saying. Is literally like an hour before the event takes place. So I'm not sure what the exact props were, but I do know those 2 props won because people DM'd me and came to my chat room and sent me a message and left me comments and things like that on YouTube thanking me for those bets. So if you want that live stream, hit the like button below. But now before we go into talking about how we are going to basically cap the main event between Marlon Moraes and Henry Cejudo and a couple of other fights, let's look back at how we did last weekend. So I couldn't cover this in part 1 of the UFC 238 videos because obviously I put that video out before this event took place, but now the results are in, the event is over, so we can see how we done. So in last week's videos for UFC on ESPN Plus 11, I was quite vocal about the fact that I really didn't like this event for betting, and I was more than happy to pass on all the fights unless a really special betting opportunity presented itself, which it often does. We often see a lot of line movement during fight week where the odds change a lot. Who knows what might happen? It's never over till it's over, they say. And luckily, I think on the Thursday or Friday leading up to UFC on ESPN Plus 11, after I put out all my videos, a very, very, very good betting opportunity popped up, which turned out to be an easy winner for us. So the bookies released the odds on the overs. I think it was like late Thursday, like Thursday evening, Thursday night, and I could not believe that they set the over on the fight between Rostem Akman and Sergey Khandozhko at 1.5 rounds. This was a big mistake for the bookies. This should have been set at over 2.5 rounds, and obviously the fight went to a decision, so it was a very, very comfortable winner. This fight only needed the last 7.5 minutes for us to cash this bet, and it absolutely cruised past that point, and the odds were very generous at around about 1.63, so we hit that for a decent sized bet and a nice overall profit. You can come to my website, you go to the chat room, scroll down, click the link, and you can basically read my reasoning for the bet. It's all there with the personal probabilities I assigned to that bet. So yeah, a decent winner, and that is basically my fundamental strategy to making a living from betting on MMA. I don't want to be betting 4 or 5 fighters per card. I don't want to be putting myself at loads of risk where you can run into big winning runs and big losing streaks where you get big swings, and that eats into your ability to compound your profits over a long period of time. The way to make money in this game is to act like a sniper and fire hard and aggressively on single bets where you have a big edge and you have got your money in a very strong position. This was such a strong position. This was such a good bet. Obviously, anything can happen in MMA, but there was tons of value here if you'd done your homework on this, and just a rock solid bet. You know, there were a lot of other fighters on this card that I leaned towards. Many of them did win, but on another night, if things would have played out slightly differently, you could get absolutely wrecked betting a card like this. So I like to be like a sniper, bet aggressively, put your money in a strong position, and get in and get out with a nice profit, which we did, which was very, very good. Now, the best part about this bet was that there was actually a decent amount of liquidity on it, because the way that liquidity generally works in MMA betting markets is that the bigger the fight, the more money gets bet on the fight, so the more money it will take bet on either fighter to move the odds. So for example, if we look this weekend at UFC 238, in order to move the odds on the fight between Henry Cejudo and Marlon Moraes, a lot of money is going to have to be bet on either fighter. You know, you could treat betting lines like or betting odds, as they call them in the rest of the world outside of America. You can treat betting lines and betting odds like a financial market, you know, like any financial market where the price of a stock or share or a commodity or a cryptocurrency is all dependent on supply and demand. How many people want to buy something, you know, if a lot of people want to buy something, if a lot of people want to buy Bitcoin, it'll push the price up. When no one wants to buy Bitcoin and there's more sellers, pushes the price down. It's exactly like that with odds. If a lot of people want to bet on Marlon Moraes and a lot of money comes in on Marlon Moraes, his odds are going to decline. And then to counteract that and balance the books for the bookies, the odds on Cejudo are going to improve. So the problem with betting things like this quite often is that liquidity tends to be very low, which means it doesn't take much money to move the odds. And we see this at different levels. In fights, for example, if you were to bet 10 grand on Marlon Moraes this weekend to beat Henry Cejudo, at this stage in the week, it probably wouldn't make that much difference to the odds because a lot of money has already been bet on this fight. So there's enough money either side to handle that bet at the major betting sites. Whereas if you wanted to bet 10 grand on Grigory Popov at one of these sites, that would probably move the line in a significant way. You'd probably see Popov come down to around about 1.80. In fact, it would be very difficult to even get your bet in the first place. You'd have to chop that 10 grand up and place the bet across multiple betting sites. Very few sites would allow you to place a big bet like of 10 grand on someone like Popov. So that's how liquidity works. And this is why I think the concept of betting units is so silly. Now, I use them on my website just because it makes it easy for everyone to track my performance, because everyone uses units, so it's generally something that most people understand. But units as a concept are very silly and very flawed, because say for example you have £100,000 or $100,000, you know, you could bet $100,000 on Henry Cejudo or Marlon Moraes this week. It wouldn't be easy. You'd probably have to chop that 100 grand up and bet it across multiple different betting sites, but it could be done. Whereas if you wanted to bet 100 grand on Rostan Akman and Sergey Khandozgo to go over 1.5 rounds, there's no way you'd be able to do it. And anyone that tells you otherwise is lying to you. So if ever anyone claims to be some high roller or some big bold guy that giving out betting information, and if ever you see people claim they won big money on a prop, they're lying to you. It's not true. The betting limits are very low. But what was actually nice about this was the liquidity was actually decent. What you often see on bets like this, where it's a prop on a fight that isn't really that popular, containing fighters that not many people have heard of, and actually a late notice fight as well, it would not have usually taken much money to destroy these odds. An example of this is last month when I tipped Scott Askham to beat Michael Materla to the members on my website. So on all the European betting sites, Scott Askham opened up at around about a 1.80 favourite, which is minus 125. And I let liquidity build up for a couple of days. I think the odds came out on like the Tuesday before the event. I waited until like the Thursday or Friday to put the bet out on Askham to let liquidity build up a bit. Because obviously if I just went and told my community to bet Askham as soon as the odds were released, his odds would literally get destroyed in 5 minutes. So I have to wait for liquidity to build up before I can put my bets out and share my tips with people. But if you look at what happened to Askham, so I literally tipped Askham here when he opened on 5 dimes on the Friday at 6 p.m. He opened at 1.57 and literally within a matter of hours he got destroyed. So he went from 1.57, which is minus 175, down to, if we have a look here, so from minus 175 down to about 1.21, which is minus 500, literally in a matter of hours after I tipped him. And that is the problem with betting low liquidity markets, and why I think units are so stupid. Because you can bet, on paper, you can bet 3 units on Marlon Moraes, okay? Where are we at? We could bet 3 units on Marlon Moraes this weekend and bet 100 grand on him, okay? But you can also say on paper that you're betting 3 units on, or I don't know, Grigory Popov to win inside the distance. You could bet 3 units on that, but you probably couldn't even bet $300 on that, let alone 100 grand. So units are a very silly system because they don't really take liquidity into account on a low liquidity market like MMA. Now I understand how they're very useful for sports like high liquidity sports like NFL, soccer, basketball, or at the highest levels anyway, like the Premier League and stuff with a lot of liquidity. But for MMA, units are just a really silly concept because they don't take liquidity into account. But with this bet, liquidity did actually hold up nicely. Like, I'm not saying you would have been able to bet like 10, 20, 30 grand on this. You wouldn't have been able to, but they certainly held up nicely. Now, when I sent this bet out to my members on the Friday, I was worried that the odds would get destroyed in the same way that they did on the Scott Askham fight, but they actually held up relatively decent. We can see here, if we go to the odds, obviously they're going to decline a little bit once my community jumps on it. They always do. If a lot of people try to bet the same thing at the same time, obviously the odds are going to change. But as you can see here, I tipped him on, I think it was the Thursday or Friday, I can't quite remember. The odds are around 1.60. And then, even though they did decline into the Saturday, they still held up quite nicely. Not a massive difference between 1.60 and 1.54. And there was still value there even at those odds. So that is how we did last week. Was very happy with this bet. Liquidity was also decent, which is a huge bonus, and the odds held up relatively well, which meant that all my members could get in on the bet, which was also a bonus. Whereas I know some of them missed out on the Askham bet because the odds crashed so hard. So that's how liquidity moves. I like to in these videos just throw in some different topics at the beginning of the videos, just to kind of share some information on some things people don't always know about. But liquidity is a big deal in a low liquidity market like MMA, and that's why the concept of units is really, really silly. I always laugh when you see these bet tracking websites. This is personally why I don't use bet tracking websites, because they irritate the fuck out of me, because you will get someone that will bet like 5 units on fucking Henry Cejudo to win in round 4 at like 26.0 or plus 2,400, and he'll hit, and then they will make more money on paper in terms of units than I will in an entire year, when the reality is that it would be very difficult to even bet $100 on something like that, because the max bet limits are so low and the liquidity is not there to support that bet. So that's why I don't use these stupid third-party tracking sites, just because the league tables and the way results are measured are all wrong, because units do not take into account liquidity, and liquidity is the most important part of any market, any financial market, any cryptocurrencies, commodities, stocks and shares. It's no good having a really good opportunity if you cannot get sufficient money down on it. So that is why I only stick to the higher liquidity lines. That's why I don't really ever share props as tips. The only props I will ever consider are the overs, because they're the second highest liquidity market behind moneyline bets, and occasionally on big fights I will go for the fight do or do not go, the decision. Those are the only three types of props you can get any type of liquidity on, and in actual fact over the last few years we're starting to see more liquidity come in on the fight does and does not go to a decision, whereas before the overs and unders used to be the second highest liquidity market. But we're kind of seeing that change in the last 12 months. But enough of that now. Let's get into the fights for UFC 238, because that's why you're here. You want to see if there are any betting opportunities on this card, or any more betting opportunities. Of course, in part 1 of this series of videos, I recommended one bet to you. The odds have already declined on that bet, so I hope you managed to get in on it. And please watch that and hit the like button on that video. I'll leave a link to that in the description below if you haven't already seen it. And now let's jump into these fights, because this event it looks like a decent event for betting. There are definitely a few betting opportunities on this card. So who knows, maybe we'll have a decent betting opportunity in this video, a second one, which would be quite interesting since the last few events have been so poor for betting. So the first fight that I want to talk about here is Yaonan Yan against Angela Hill. Now, I'm sure I'm butchering Yan's first name, so I'm very, very sorry about that. But Angela Hill against Yan is a decent competitive fight, a fight that I know a lot of people are interested in from a betting perspective. But for me, I'm quite open-minded about this fight. I would actually consider betting on either girl depending on how the odds move. And I know that this is something that a decent sized percentage of people watching this video won't understand, because a lot of people that come to watch my videos, they want picks. Give me the pick. Tell me who's going to win. They work in rights and wrongs and absolutes and blacks and whites, and they do not understand that on any given night any fighter can beat anyone, and there are multiple different ways that a fight could play out. And this fight is a very good example of that, because I could see this fight really playing out in two different ways. Both girls each have one legit path to victory. Now, I feel that one of the pathways to victory is more likely than the other, but depending on where the odds are, that doesn't mean that the less likely bet is off the table. The less likely outcome is off the table in terms of betting, because it all really depends on the payoff you get from the odds. Now, again, I know a lot of people don't understand this concept, but it's just the way it is. In order to make money from betting, in order to crush it, you have to be open-minded. You have to stop thinking that there is a right and wrong. You know, good bets can lose and bad bets can win. I always say that, and the devil is in the detail. It is very, very important to understand all the different possibilities and ways a fight can play out, assigning probabilities to each of those possibilities, and then looking at the odds to see if each possibility is worth betting in terms of the payoff. So that's a lot of what I'm going to be talking about in the breakdown for this fight. There is no such thing as right or wrong. If anyone tells you they feel confident in either of these girls, run away from them. They have no idea what they're talking about, because if you've done your homework on this fight, you will see two very clear ways that this fight could go. And like I say, one is more likely than the other, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the more likely outcome is a good bet, because the odds are quite steep. So let's stop rambling on. Let's get into it. So the way you have to the way you have to approach a fight like this for betting, where there are two clear possibilities, is that you have to consider both possibilities and assign a probability to each. And then you have to look at the betting odds, look at the implied probability on the betting odds to calculate whether each possibility is worth betting. So the first way, and the most likely way I see this fight playing out, is Yan basically walking Angela Hill down, forcing Angela Hill to fight on the back foot, just chipping away at it and boxing her up. Now, Yan is quite a one-dimensional fighter. She just comes forward, walks her opponent down, and looks to box them up. She throws these weird side kicks which are completely pointless. against a higher level of opponent, they would open her up to being taken down because they're quite lazy, telegraphed, sloppy kicks that could be caught and turned into a takedown. Obviously, that's not an issue against Angela Hill because she's a very low-level grappler. She never tries to take her opponents down. And aside from that, you very rarely see Yan go for takedowns or anything like that. So despite Angela Hill having really bad takedown defense, I don't think Yan is going to try and exploit that. But Yan very one-dimensional. She likes to come forward, very a stereotypical tough Asian fighter who likes to walk forward, blocking punches with her face, but likes to fight away inside and has decent boxing for a female in the strawweight division. She also throws a very high volume of strikes per round, and she's got great cardio for 3 rounds, which is why I favour her here, because as we know, Angela Hill is a very good one-round fighter, but as the fight goes on, she becomes significantly less effective, significantly less technical, a lot more sloppy. If you go back and watch any of Angela Hill's fights, you'll see that in round 1 she's very light on her feet, great footwork, very elusive, throws a wide range of strikes, high output. She's great in round 1, but then into round 2 she becomes a lot more flat-footed, a lot more predictable. Her footwork kind of goes out the window and she just becomes a lot sloppier, which means this is a good stylistic matchup for Yan and Yan, because Yan likes to walk forward, getting inside, forcing her opponents to engage, forcing her opponents to work, and that will test the cardio of Angela Hill and force Angela Hill to fight on the back foot. Remember, Angela Hill likes to counter-strike, and one of the reasons why she slows down as the fight goes on is because utilising a lot of footwork and fighting on the outside takes a lot of energy, because you're constantly moving, you're exerting a lot more energy than your opponent is just walking you down, and that's why Angela Hill slows down. So stylistically, this is a very good matchup for Yan and Yan, but at the same time, you have to look at MMA fights on a timeline, so they're 15 minutes long, and the fighter that wins 2 out of those 3 rounds is going to win the fight. So because Yan and Yan is very one-dimensional, just walks forward in straight lines, just looking to land punches, doesn't really bring much else to the table, at least in round 1 I expect Angela Hill to do very well. She should be able to stay on the outside, play the role of Matador, and use her more diverse range of strikes to pick Yan off as she comes forward. Now in round 2, I do expect Hill to have slowed down significantly and become quite a bit more flat-footed due to Yan's forward pressure, but she may still have enough gas in the tank to make round 2 very close and edge it, particularly if you don't have very good judges and they just kind of fucking pick a name out the air and score the second round for Hill. Now I'm almost 100% sure, well, 100% that's a silly thing to say. I'm like 80 to 90% sure that Yan wins round 3 because of how flat-footed and sloppy Hill becomes as the fight goes on, but I'm quite confident Hill will win round 1. I'm quite confident Yan will win round 2, but Hill could make it close, especially if she shows up with improved cardio, although that is unlikely because she is taking this fight on 3 weeks' notice. Yan was supposed to be fighting Felice Herrig, so more unlikely that Hill shows up with good cardio. But that's how I see this fight playing out. So the 2 pathways, the 2 ways I see this fight going, the first way is Yan walking Hill down, boxing her up, and winning a comfortable 29-28 or 30-27 decision. Just cruise into a win. Hill unable to deal with the forward pressure, slowing down, becoming more sloppy as the fight goes on. And as the fight goes on, Yan gets better, starts to land more, wins a comfortable decision. The other scenario I can see, with the less likely scenario, is Angela Hill starting strong, loads of footwork, light on her feet, outstriking Yan in round 1, making round 2 close, and losing the 3rd round, which would mean the fight would end up being very close. Someone would probably win 29-28. It would possibly go to a split decision. Those are the 2 scenarios, but Yan cruise into a win by walking Hill down and making Hill struggle with the forward pressure is definitely the more likely outcome. So where we've established 2 really clear outcomes, I really don't see that many other possibilities. Obviously, it's MMA, anything can happen, but realistically, I think those are the 2 most likely outcomes. Neither girl really carries knockout power. Both girls are quite tough. Both girls have got decent chins. Neither girl really looks to take this fight to the ground, so a submission's unlikely. So it's very likely this fight goes the distance, and those 2 scenarios I've just talked about are the most likely ways that this fight plays out. So what I would also say about both girls is that they're both very predictable. They show up and perform with the same game plan in every fight. And if they're losing, they really have no plan B. They can't really switch things up. Yan is still going to walk forward and try and box her opponent up, and Hill is still going to counter strike on the outside and chip away at her opponent and play the role of Matador. They really don't have another gear to go to, and that's one of the reasons why it's so easy to identify these two different scenarios, because both girls are very predictable. There's no plan B there, and it's very unlikely that they show up with a new set of skills that could change the way that fight would play out. So when we have two clearly defined outcomes, very important we talk about this fight in the context of the odds, because the odds are the most important thing here. We are not interested in picks. I always see guys in the comments ask for picks, so they want to know the pick, who's going to win, and I just have no interest in entering into conversations like that. What I do is about making money. It is about betting on fighters, putting my money in strong positions, and consistently making money over the long term. And this fight is a very good example of how you've got to let the odds do the work for you, because I would be quite happy to bet on Yan or Angela Hill. I'm completely open-minded depending on where the odds end up going on this fight. So in the context of the odds and where they currently are, we currently see that Yaonan Yan is around about, call it a 1.54 favourite, which is moneyline odds of around about minus 185 for an implied probability of 65%. So in order to bet Yan here, you've got to give her a 70% or better chance of winning. And that is quite steep, because we have clearly defined two possibilities. Like, Angela Hill definitely has a chance of winning this fight, but at the same time, I do favour Yan's path to victory here. Now, I definitely give Yan greater than a 60% chance of winning. I think she deserves more than a 60% chance of winning, but 70% is a bit of a stretch. So I think this implied probability is kind of justified, which means that these odds, Yan is probably a pass. I do favour her, but not sure if I favour her any more than this. 70% is a big implied probability to award a fighter. So then if we look at the odds on Angela Hill, we can see that her average odds at the moment are currently around about, call it 2.70, which is plus 170 for an implied probability of 37%. And again, I feel giving her a 40% chance of winning this fight is quite generous. She's just not great. Quite sloppy in the second and third round as her cardio starts to be tested, and Yan's forward pressure should really, really push that cardio quite hard. So 40%, in order to bet Angela Hill here, you'd have to give her, a 45 to 50% chance of winning, and that's just a stretch for me, so that's a pass. But we are not done talking about this fight yet, because we have already seen a lot of line movement on this event. We have seen the odds on the main event between Henry Cejudo and Marlon Moraes jump all over the place here. We can see, the odds have ranged on Marlon Moraes anywhere from 1.57, which is minus 175, right up to 1.87, which is minus 115. Huge difference in odds, loads of line movement. We've also seen loads of line movement in the fight between Cerrone and Tony Ferguson. So we've seen Cerrone's odds decline from 2.75, which was plus 175, down to 2.18, which is plus 118 yesterday, and now they're back up to 2.24. I'm not going to cover off all the odds movement. We've seen odds movement on Keita Lamas as well. We've seen a lot of odds movement on the Blagoy Ivanov versus Tai Tuivasa fight, where we've seen Tuivasa's odds improve from, down around about 1.56, which is minus 178, up to around about 1.74 now, which is minus 135. So there has been a hell of a lot of odds movement on this card, and I would not at all be surprised if we also see some odds movement on the Angela Hill versus Yaonan Yan fight. So at the moment, I think the odds are pretty accurate. I think the odds are roughly where they should be, so it's a pass. But depending on how the odds move, I would still consider a bet on either fighter, because say for example Angela Hill's odds, say people start looking at Yan's forward pressure and they think she's more likely to win, so they start hammering Yan's odds, and we see Angela Hill's odds improve up to possibly 3.20. That would be a potential betting opportunity at moneyline odds of plus 220. But at the same time, the bet I'd be more inclined to place in here was on Yan, because she's got the most likely path to victory, right? Her path to victory is the more likely. And Yan's not really that well known. She's only had a few fights in the UFC. This will be her fourth pro fight, but the casual bettors, the casual gamblers that bet on MMA, they account for the majority of money that gets bet on MMA, and the majority of money that gets bet on MMA gets bet close to the time of the event. So you tend to see the more of the odds movement, more of the line movement close to the time of the event. Now, I think there's a very good chance that the odds on Yan improve, because if you're a casual gambler that just wants to place some bets to make these fights more interesting, the majority of casual gamblers will just skim through Wikipedia or win-loss records. They won't really do that much homework, so they'll come to Yan's win-loss record. They'll be like, oh, she's only had 3 fights in the UFC. She hasn't really fought anyone, is what you hear from casuals all the time. Haven't fought anyone. Bunch of fighters with losing records or making their pro debut, and then they look at Angela Hill. Oh, she's had loads of fights in the UFC. She's got some decent wins in the UFC. She's gone the distance with some decent fighters like Jessica Andrade. I've heard of Angela Hill. I remember her from The Ultimate Fighter. She shouldn't be the underdog, therefore I'll bet Angela Hill. And that's really the thought process the majority of casual gamblers will go for. So under that circumstance, we would see a lot of money come in on Angela Hill towards the end of this week, which would then improve the odds on Yan. Now, what's interesting about this is that the fight between Blagoy Ivanov and Tai Tuivasa has seen quite a lot of line movement, where we've seen Tuivasa's odds go from around about 1.55, which is minus 181, up to around about 1.74, which is minus 135, so a lot of line movement. But these odds where Tuivasa is currently around about where Yan is at the moment. So if Yan Yan's odds were to improve like this in the same way that Tuivasa's odds, she would be a great bet. If we could get Yan at anywhere around 1.66, which is minus 152, she would then become a good bet, because odds of 1.66 give her an implied probability of 60%. So where we're capping her at around about 65%, she would then become bettable, because then we get a 5% edge over the bookie from where we cap her at around 65% from the implied probability at 60%. So at the moment, this fight's a pass, but I'm keeping a close eye on these odds. Lots of odds have moved on this card. We've seen Tony Ferguson's odds move from around 1.40, which is minus 250, up to around 1.70 yesterday, which is minus 142. So we've seen similar odds movement on Tony Ferguson and also on Tai Tuivasa. If we get that same kind of line movement on Yan, she will be a good bet. So at the current odds, it's a pass, but this is something I'm keeping a close eye on. Like I say, let the odds do the work for you. No bet at the moment, but could be a bet on the table in the very near future. Now we go on to the next fight that I want to talk about in today's video, which is going to be Tatiana Suarez against Nina Ansaroff. And I hear I hear people coming into my chat room and asking questions about this fight, because when you see a fight like this where one fighter is a huge underdog, I understand why the underdog will be tempting, because there's only 2 outcomes at the end of the day. Either Suarez is going to win or Ansaroff is going to win. So when you see a fighter like Ansaroff at huge underdog odds of around about 7.0, with an implied probability of 14%, that's very tempting. Now, before I get into breaking this fight down, I want to make it clear that I think Nina Ansaroff is an excellent fighter. I am very high on Ansaroff. I've been on Ansaroff for a very long time. If you go back and watch if you go back and check my results page on my website, Nina Ansaroff has been an absolute money train for me, because I feel like throughout her career she's been very, very underrated. So I bet her to beat Juliana Lima. I bet her to beat Justine Kish. She lost both those fights and cost me money. But I also bet on her pre-fight to beat Angela Hill and Randa Marcos. And she was the underdog in the majority of these fights. I've been high on Ansaroff ever since she came into the UFC. I think she's excellent. I also hit a nice live bet on Ansaroff when she fought Claudia Gadelha, I think, although I'm not 100% sure, don't quote me on that, can't quite remember. I think I did, but maybe my brain's playing tricks on me. But anyway, the point I'm trying to make before I go any further is that I am very, very high on Ansaroff. She's been a money train for me. She's made me a lot of money over the years. You can go back and on my website, look at my results page and see that I've bet Ansaroff a bunch of times over the last few years since she came into the UFC. Having said that, I always say, just like in poker, you've got to know when to hold them and know when to fold them. And even at these odds, Ansaroff is a clear fold for me, guys. I understand why it's tempting, but styles make matchups, and this is just a very, very bad stylistic matchup for Nina Ansaroff. I love Nina Ansaroff. I rate her very highly. I think she would beat most of the girls in the UFC's top 5 of the strawweight division. I think she's vastly underrated, but you got to know when to hold them and know when to fold them, and this is not the time to hold Ansaroff. You got to just pass on this opportunity, guys. And the reason why is because I'm going to keep this very very brief. I don't want to go into a really detailed analysis on this fight because I'm trying to keep the video as short as possible. So I will leave stuff out this, please. I know you'll be leaving in the comments more about this, more about that. Just know on this fight I'm intentionally leaving stuff out to keep it short. But what I would say is that Nina Ansaroff has got excellent initial takedown defense, but when you do get her down, she really struggles to work her way back to her feet. And also, she has very good takedown defense early in a fight, but as you continue to wet blanket her and spam takedowns, she starts to slow down, which means she then, as the fight goes on, tends to give up takedowns very easily. Now, Tatiana Suarez has the cardio to relentlessly shoot takedowns for 15 minutes, no problem. She's also got, Olympic level wrestling. And while I do think she may struggle to get Ansaroff down early in the fight because Ansaroff's got great initial takedown defense, I do think it will only be a matter of time before Suarez wears on Ansaroff, eventually drags her to the ground. And then when she does drag Ansaroff to the ground, she will absolutely dominate because, like I say, Ansaroff's got great initial takedown defense, but she struggles to work her way back to her feet. Now, obviously, Ansaroff is a very, very technical kickboxer, high-level taekwondo. She will have the advantage standing, but I don't expect Suarez to give her the time or space to utilise that advantage because Suarez will want to be all the way out of her range where Nina Ansaroff cannot land on her, or all the way in, driving her into the cage, working with takedowns. And like I say, guys, I do think Suarez will find it difficult to take Ansaroff down early, but eventually she will get her down, and when she does, she is going to dominate. Now, MMA is a crazy sport, anything can happen, and I am not opposed to rolling the dice on big underdogs, but you've got to pick your spots. If you really, 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 really want to take a big gamble this weekend, Jessica Eye has a much bigger chance of winning than has a much bigger chance of beating Valentina Shevchenko than Ansaroff has of beating Suarez, because stylistically, Suarez is a very bad matchup for Ansaroff. Ansaroff doesn't really have a path to victory, whereas there are a few weaknesses in Valentina Shevchenko's game that maybe I can exploit. It's extremely unlikely she does. I give her less than a 20% chance of exploiting those weaknesses, but there are weaknesses present in Shevchenko's overall skill set that I can exploit, possibly in some kind of crazy universe, whereas I don't really see what Ansaroff could do to win. So I've skimmed over that fight. I haven't gone into that much detail. But it's intentional, guys. I know I've left loads of stuff out, but again, I don't want that We don't want the breakdown for that fight to be huge and to go on for like 10-20 minutes when it really just is not worth betting. Pass on it. It's pointless betting it. And remember, go back and watch part 1 in my series of videos for UFC 238 to also learn the reasons why I don't recommend putting fighters like Tatiana Suarez into parlays and accumulators and things like that. I kind of talk about a lot of that in part 1. So now we go on to the final fight that I want to talk about in today's video, which is probably the reason why you are here. The video, the fight that most people will care about, which is the fight between Henry Cejudo and Magic Marlon Moraes. Now, I love it. What a fight. What a great fight. Henry Cejudo making big improvements from fight to fight. Marlon Moraes absolutely starching people. And we're either going to see another 2-weight world champion with Cejudo winning, or we are going to see a brand new bantamweight champion in Marlon Moraes getting gold. We're going to see a brand new bantamweight champion anyway, but I guess it's a little bit more exciting if Marlon gets it, because Cejudo's already the champion at 125 pounds. Now, this is a tricky fight. I'm not going to say it's a tricky fight for betting, because, spoiler alert, I actually am going to recommend a bet on this fight. But it is a tricky fight because some assumptions have to be made. And every once in a while, you have to make some assumptions, because even though there'll be gaps in information present, there will be enough clues to suggest a fighter is worth betting. And I'll get into a little bit as we go on, which will make more sense of what I've just said. But it's a tricky fight because Henry Cejudo is an Olympic level wrestler. And if we look at Marlon Moraes' history, he's 22-5. If we look at his MMA record, he's never really fought a high-level wrestler or a high-level grappler. Now, if you have just said to yourself in your head, what about Aljamain Sterling? Please punch yourself in the face right now. Because yes, Aljamain Sterling is a strong wrestler, but that fight literally ended in a minute. So we didn't get a chance to see Marlon Moraes' wrestling, takedown defense, grappling defense tested. So if after I just said that, you were like, oh, what about Sterling? Please punch yourself in the face right now. If you look at everyone else that Marlon Moraes has fought, the majority of his opponents have really been kickboxers. I mean, Cody Bollinger is probably the best pure grappler that I can think of out of all these guys. Obviously we've seen John Dodson, Rafael Assunção shoot a takedown from time to time, but generally speaking, the only real pure grapplers here are Josh Hill and Cody Bollinger back in World Series of Fighting. But these fights took place, 3, 4, 5 years ago, so Marlon Moraes is going to have improved a lot since then. So the point I'm trying to make is Henry Cejudo is an Olympic level wrestler, and we haven't really seen that much of Marlon Moraes' takedown defense, so we don't know how he's going to deal with Cejudo's wrestling. But what we do know is that Marlon Moraes is a very high-level Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. In the occasions that he has been taken down throughout his career, or in occasions where his fights have gone to the ground, you can just tell that this guy is at a very high level. I mean, it is not easy to submit a high-level black belt like Rafael Assunção. I know that Assunção was hurt with strikes before the submission came, but, Marlon Moraes still jumped all over him and looked very fluid on the ground. Now, even though we haven't seen Marlon Moraes' takedown defense tested, throughout his career he has shown flashes of very good takedown defense, and part of that is because of his body type. At 5'6", he has a very small, compact body type, and this type of body type, we always talk about different body types in MMA, where we talk about the long, lean fighter, like a Stefan Struve or a Curtis Melendra or Megan Anderson. Generally speaking, fighters with that body type are more likely to have bad takedown defense because they're very tall, which means you can shoot in on their legs and upset their balance. Now, there are outliers like John Jones and Israel Adesanya, I get that, but generally speaking, as the general rule, that body type, bad takedown defense. Now, as a general rule, this type of body type has excellent takedown defense. If you think about Team Alpha Male, most of the Team Alpha Males fighters have this kind of body type. Short, compact, low center of gravity, strong core, which means they're very difficult to take down and almost impossible to hold down. So while we haven't seen that much of Marlon Moraes' takedown defense, he has the body type to be very difficult to hold down and take down. And he also has shown flashes of very good takedown defense. And also, there are some other clues that suggest that he also has good takedown defense. The first clue is that he started training at a very early stage in his career at Nova União under Andre Pederneiras. And if we think about it, over the years, Nova União, the one thing that you can kind of associate with Nova União is legendary takedown defense. If we look back at all the big name Nova União fighters who have competed in the UFC over the years, every single one of them has had incredible takedown defense. Every single one of them has been almost impossible to take down and even harder to take down. If you think about it, Jose Aldo, Renan Barão, Hakron Diaz, Junior Dos Santos, Claudio Silva, Jussier Formiga, even Johnny Eduardo had great initial takedown defense. So all these guys that have come out of Nova União over the years have had incredible takedown defense. So the fact that Marlon Moraes started his career at Nova União is a strong indication that he may also have excellent takedown defense and be difficult to hold down, even though we haven't seen it because he hasn't really fought that many strong wrestlers. And also, another clue that Marlon Moraes may have incredible takedown defense is that he trains with Frankie Edgar, who is, in my opinion, the best MMA grappler in the lower weight classes. Frankie Edgar is one of the best MMA grapplers of all time because he's just got cardio for days, which means he can relentlessly shoot on his opponents. He has a wide spectrum of different takedowns that you can go to: single legs, double legs, body locks, back control, the works. He's great, very explosive, and he's got the cardio, like I say, to do it relentlessly shoot on your opponent, which is not easy to do. And Marlon Moraes has been a long time training partner of Frankie Edgar. They've trained together for at least 5 years now, which means you could not ask for a better training partner for this fight than Frankie Edgar. You know, training with Frankie Edgar every day, having someone with MMA grappling of that level shooting in on you all day long is going to be way more difficult than anything Henry Cejudo is going to bring to the table in this fight, because I know on paper Henry Cejudo is a higher level grappler than Frankie Edgar because he's got that Olympic gold medal, but MMA grappling is different. If NCAA Division 1 wrestling and Olympic wrestling meant everything, then the top 10 of every single UFC division would be full of Olympic wrestlers and full of NCAA Division 1 level wrestlers. But the top 10 of each division aren't full of those type of fighters because MMA grappling is different. And Frankie Edgar is one of the best fighters in the world of all time ever when it comes to MMA grappling. So training with this guy every day for the last 5 years is going to have prepared Marlon Moraes for Henry Cejudo, and it is probably going to have helped him develop incredible takedown defense and a very high level ground game and a good ability to work his way back to his feet. So the point I'm trying to make is we don't know if Marlon Moraes is going to be able to stuff Cejudo's takedowns or pop back to his feet if he does get taken down. But based on everything I've just said, we can assume his takedown defense is pretty legit and he's difficult to hold down. And we know for sure he is a very, 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 very high level black belt. So even if Cejudo does get him down, it's going to be no picnic for Cejudo on the ground because Moraes is constantly attacking with submissions. So what I would also say about Cejudo's style of wrestling is that even though it's formidable in terms of him being very athletic, very explosive, and he also, like Edgar, has a wide range of different takedowns that you can go to. And another thing that I like about Cejudo is something that sets Cejudo out from almost anyone else in the UFC. I mean, you don't even see Daniel Cormier doing this. One thing I love about Cejudo is that if he shoots an initial takedown attempt and he can feel that his opponent is stuffing that initial takedown attempt, there are not many fighters in MMA who can switch to a different technique as fast as Cejudo. So it's like, it's hard. Like, this is why I wish I could use UFC footage to break these fights down, because I could actually show you what I'm talking about. But if you look at a fighter like Khabib, so Khabib's got excellent chain wrestling, but Khabib's form of chain wrestling moves through a gradual process. Same as Usman, it's a gradual process where if Khabib shoots in on, say, a single leg and his opponent does a great job of stuffing it, there's, a 5 to 10 second window where Khabib methodically starts to work to take the back or transition into a double leg. With Cejudo, it's like bang, immediately. It's like a second. He shoots in on a single leg or a double leg. Oh, I don't have that. Literally a fraction of a second, he's gone for the trip takedown or transition to the body lock. There are very few fighters that move as fast as Cejudo in that regard, and that's why he is so formidable. That's why he's an Olympic level guy, and he's something very, very special. But there are two weaknesses to Cejudo's wrestling that make me think that Moraes may be able to deal with him quite well. The first weakness is that Cejudo doesn't have the best top control, and before you guys start shouting at your computer or your phone or wherever you're watching me, this is a problem that a lot of Olympic level wrestlers have. Some other Olympic level wrestlers for you to go and watch are obviously Daniel Cormier and Montel Jackson. And you may disagree with me, but neither of those guys have very good top control either. Now, this may surprise you, but if you go back and watch their body of work throughout their entire career, Daniel Cormier's top game is getting a lot better now, but they do give their opponents a lot of space to explode back to their feet. And when you see Daniel Cormier demonstrating very heavy top control, it's usually because he is facing opponents like Volkan Ozdemir or Anderson Silva or a 45-year-old Dan Henderson, which just didn't have the technique to work their way back to their feet. When Cormier fights a guy who's good at exploding back to his feet, he struggles to hold them down, like a lot of Olympic guys, because the Olympic style of wrestling is focused on takedowns, not so much on maintaining control for long periods of time. So Olympic level guys like Cejudo and DC do tend to give their opponents a lot of space to work their way back to their feet. However, the difference between Cormier and Cejudo is that Cormier has the cardio and technique to just then start to ragdoll you. So even though he gives the space to his opponent to work their way back to their feet, he has the technique and the cardio to keep hold of them and keep transitioning into different kind of takedowns and keep dragging them to the ground. So if DC does take an opponent down, they may be able to pop back to their feet quite quickly, but while they're popping back to their feet, he's going to maintain that body lock, and as soon as they get back up, he's dragging them right back down. And the more he does drag them down, the more tired they become, which then ultimately enables him to establish longer periods of top control. Cejudo can't do that because Cejudo doesn't have that kind of cardio. So Cejudo is more of a single shot wrestler. Cejudo cannot Khabib people for 25 minutes. He cannot ragdoll people. DC can. That's what separates Cejudo's style of Olympic wrestling and DC's. DC can ragdoll people and wet blanket them for 25 minutes. Cejudo's single shot. So the difference is, remember, the devil is in the detail, guys. The difference is DC can shoot a takedown in the first minute of the first round and keep shooting takedowns and ragdoll you for 25 minutes. Henry Cejudo can't do that. What he needs to do is focus on keeping a fight standing, focus on defense for the first 2 or 3 minutes of a round, and then he's going to commit a lot of energy to securing a takedown in the final 1 or 2 minutes of the round to steal the round and put his stamp on the round, knowing the judges tend to score rounds in favour of the fighter who ends the round the strongest. And this is the typical TriStar style of fighting. GSP built a career off this style. Many TriStar fighters use this style to win fights. It's a very obvious style, quite an easy style to game plan for as well, which I'll get into in a moment. But Henry Cejudo focuses on just staying out of danger for the first 2-3 minutes of a round and then steals every round with a late takedown. And it's very difficult to shut down because he's very, very explosive, can transition very quickly on a takedown shot into a different style of takedown. And another problem with Cejudo in this game planning style, these tactics, is that if he does land a big explosive takedown, even though he does have poor top control, he can still maintain top control for 30 seconds to 1 minute. And even if his opponents pop back to their feet, they don't have a lot of time left in the round because he shot the takedown late in the round to kind of get it back, which means his style's very effective at shooting takedown, at stealing rounds, It's basically what won the fight against Demetrius Johnson. The fight against Demetrius Johnson was very close, but Cejudo did a great job of timing his takedowns late in the rounds, the final 1 or 2 minutes to steal rounds, and it was that stealing of the rounds which sealed the deal and got him the split decision. But the problem with that style, it is very effective, but it is also very predictable. Because even though Henry Cejudo does switch up takedown attempts excellently with light speed, and he's very, very formidable at that, Marlon Moraes trains under Mark Henry, who's one of the best brains in MMA. And if I am a guy that sits in my pants watching fights all day and making a living from betting fights, if I can identify these patterns and these strategies, you bet your fucking ass that Mark Henry can as well. So Marlon Moraes is going to be very well prepared for this. He is going to be... if you think about training with Frankie Edgar, he's going to be in the gym every day, and he can be sparring and doing rounds and focusing on spending the first 2-3 minutes of a round just fucking putting it on Cejudo with his explosive striking, and then in the final 2 minutes of each round, Moraes can let off the gas a little bit, go back into more of a defensive stance, defensive mindset, and just wait for that shot to come. Because that takedown shot from Cejudo will come in the final 1 or 2 minutes of each round, and Marlon Moraes has just got to get ready for it. And Mark Henry will be able to spot this, will be able to get Moraes ready for this, and they will have a game plan for this, which is what makes this interesting, because Cejudo's a difficult style, but he's also quite predictable. And now when it comes to striking, I mean, we've talked about grappling in depth. Striking, Henry Cejudo is making big improvements. He is... now favouring quite a karate-based style, but I don't think he's going to pose too much of a problem to Moraes standing, because he doesn't really have that much power in his hands, and even though he's made huge improvements to his striking, there are a couple of subtle signs that he's still a very inexperienced striker. So the first sign is that he overreacts to every feint. So a feint is obviously when you think you're going to throw a punch, don't actually commit to throwing it. What you'll see if you go back and watch Cejudo is every time his opponent throws a feint, he'll go like that. Or he'll react to the feint. And when you're facing an explosive, experienced Muay Thai-based striker like Marlon Moraes with legit one-shot KO power, that he can KO you dead in any second with any one of his 8 limbs, that's a bit of a problem, because he's going to be setting Cejudo up for stuff and getting reads where he's throwing feints, Cejudo's overcommitting to one side, he's going to walk on the big counters from Moraes. And also, when Cejudo throws stuff, he really, really, really throws it. Like when he throws power strikes, he really commits to it. But he doesn't necessarily commit like a Dan Henderson, in the sense that he fucking channels like Thor's hammer into throwing his right hand. What I mean is when Cejudo commits to his power strike, he throws his head into it as well, which means he's also wide open to huge counters. And another thing that I don't like, or actually I'll just talk about that, I'll just forget that. Let me just keep this on track. So those two things are significant, overcommitting to feints and overcommitting to power strikes, because Marlon Moraes is... I'm going to make a bold statement. Marlon Moraes is the most devastating knockout artist in the history of the bantamweight division. He is terrifying. Marlon Moraes KOs guys dead. He fucking kill shots them. Kill shots guys that don't get kill shotted. Like if we look at his last three wins by all of them have come by knockout or TKO out of nowhere, literally flash KO'd. And you guys know me, if you spend a lot of time talking to me in the chat room, or if you listen to these videos, you know that I do not focus on results. I don't give a fuck about results. All I care about is the skills displayed in the octagon. So I can look at like this and I'll be like, this guy's got last 3 wins by knockout or TKO. It doesn't tell me anything. It doesn't fucking mean a goddamn thing. It's like when Nico Price KO'd Tim Means. It doesn't mean a goddamn thing, because Nico Price was getting dominated in that fight. I do not care about the result. All I care about is the skills that occur in the octagon. And that is why Marlon Moraes is so goddamn impressive, because where we're talking about Cejudo being able to make those split-second reads and split-second decisions in chaining in the different takedown attempts, Marlon Moraes, the reason why he's been able to knock these three killers out very early into the fight is that it's almost like he's in the Matrix. If he sees a split-second opening, he is going to throw one of the 8 limbs with killer instinct and bad intentions to end Cejudo's life. He is devastating, and that is so significant here because when Cejudo is ducking down for takedowns, or he's overreacting to feints, moving his head one way too much either side, or when he's really throwing everything into a power strike, Moraes has got that split-second Matrix-style vision to just kill Cejudo fucking dead out of nowhere, and he absolutely has it, and it's spectacular to watch. And the point I'm trying to make is, if you look at the guys that he's KO'd, these last 3 guys he's KO'd, Aljamain Sterling, Jimmy Rivera, and Rafael Assunção, you do not kill shot these type of fighters. These guys do not get flatlined. Marlon Moraes death shotted these 3 guys. Now, if this happens once, that is a flash KO. When it happens 3 times in a row, there's something there. And if we look at the records of both guys, let's start off with Rafael Assunção. Now, Rafael Assunção, one of the best fighters in the world, 33 pro MMA fights, was all right. Okay, he got submitted. Okay, he got submitted on paper. But again, this is why I don't care about the result. I only care about what happens in the octagon. He got submitted, but he got submitted after being knocked down and rocked badly by Moraes. That's what opened up the submission for Moraes. So I'm counting this as a win by knockout or TKO. On paper, it's a submission win, but really, it was all set up through the knockdown from Moraes. So if we look at it, in 33 pro fights, Assunção was KO'd there by a prime Eric Koch. And that is it. So prior to being death shotted by Marlon Moraes, Rafael Assunção had only lost due to knockout or TKO 1 time in 32 pro fights, which is extremely impressive when you take into consideration that he's fought some of the best fighters in the world. You know, a prime Mike Easton, Vaughan Lee was no joke back in the day, TJ Dillashaw, Pedro Munoz, TJ Dillashaw again. Very, very, very impressive. You know, Rob Font's no picnic. Diego Nunes was one of the best fighters in the world back in the day. Yves Jabin, you know what I mean, was decent back in the WEC days. So Rafael Assunção only lost by strikes 1 time in 32 pro fights, and Marlon Moraes kills him dead. But that could just be a flash KO. But wait, it gets deeper. Jimmy Rivera, 25 pro MMA fights, absolutely murdered by Marlon Moraes. And if we go back through his record, lost due to punches against Dennis Bermudez on The Ultimate Fighter. Aside from that, we can include his amateur career as well. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Plus 25. So in 32 fights, or 34 fights, we'll disregard the Marlon Moraes one. In 34 fights, Jimmy Rivera had only ever lost once due to strikes, and that was on The Ultimate Fighter. 34 fights he's only lost due to strikes once, before he got kill-shotted by Marlon Moraes. But wait, it gets better. Against Aljamain Sterling, Sterling has had 20 pro fights, 19 if you disregard the one against Moraes. He got murdered against Marlon Moraes, and look, if you go back through his record, let's include his amateur career as well. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 amateur fights on top of 20, so that's 26 fights if we discount the Marlon Moraes fight. In 26 fights, Aljamain Sterling had never been knocked out or TKO'd. So Moraes, the point I'm trying to make is, Moraes is kill-shotting guys that do not get kill-shotted. That fucking speaks volumes when you are fighting a guy like Henry Cejudo that's still an inexperienced striker that overcommits to feints, overcommits to power strikes, overreacts to feints. That is a fucking big deal. Especially when, even though we can't be sure Marlon Moraes has amazing takedown defense, he does train with Frankie Edgar every day. He did start his career at Nova União, and he does have the perfect body type to have excellent takedown defense. all paths suggest that Marlon Moraes will be very difficult to take down and very difficult to hold down. We can't be sure, it's an assumption, but based on the information we have available, it's likely that he's going to be difficult to take down and hold down. So, what does that mean from a betting perspective? Have I covered everything? I think I have. What does that mean from a betting perspective? So if we look at the odds at the moment, Henry Cejudo is currently around about an average of 2.10, which is plus 110, for an implied probability of 48%. So straight out the gate, there's no way I'd bet Henry Cejudo in this fight, because I think he's going to find it difficult to take Marlon Moraes down. I think he's going to find it difficult to hold Moraes down. Of course, that's an assumption. He might ragdoll Moraes for 25 minutes. Moraes might have terrible takedown defense. We don't know. We're assuming. But I also think he's in big trouble when this fight's standing. Every time he shoots a takedown, he's going to risk running straight onto one of Marlon Moraes' flying knee counters or head kick counters. Exactly the same type of counter he caught Aljamain Sterling with. So no way I bet Cejudo here. Absolutely no way. And also, what we've got to take into consideration is if we bring it up, one more thing that I completely forgot to put in my notes. Henry Cejudo Instagram. Let's see if we can bring this up here, guys. So the very last thing I want to talk about with Cejudo is that he posted a few days ago this picture of him looking very good, very shredded. But as you can also see, around his necks and particularly his arms, Henry Cejudo is carrying a hell of a lot more muscle mass in this bantamweight fight than he usually does at flyweight. And now this can be a double-edged sword. When we know that Henry Cejudo cuts a lot of weight to make flyweight, we know it's a brutal cut for him, so he could look absolutely incredible at bantamweight. His cardio may look much better, his conditioning may look much better. Maybe he will make me eat my words and ragdoll Marlon Moraes for 25 minutes. It's definitely possible. But at bantamweight, where Henry Cejudo's moving up 10 pounds to take this fight, he's also carrying a lot more muscle mass, which means all this muscle mass needs a lot more energy for all that explosive energy, which means it might actually work against him, and putting on this extra 10 pounds of muscle mass may actually make his cardio even worse. The best example I can think of this is when Conor McGregor fought Nate Diaz the first time. Usually we see Conor McGregor quite lean, decent amount of muscle but not excessive, and his cardio, it's not great, but it's a lot better at 145 and lightweight than it looked in that welterweight fight, the first welterweight fight against Nate Diaz, where Conor McGregor turned up in that first fight looking like a white Tyron Woodley. Loads of extra muscle mass we'd never seen from him before, and he gassed out very quickly. So it's difficult to tell what this extra muscle mass for Cejudo is going to mean. It might hurt his cardio, it might help his cardio. There's no way to be sure, but it's just something else to think about. Just another factor to take into consideration. But yeah, there's no way. That's just another reason why I wouldn't bet Cejudo, because even though his cardio might look much better at bantamweight, it also might look worse. So if we look at the odds on Marlon Moraes, current average odds available are around about 1.80, which is minus 125 for an implied probability of 56%. And you know what, guys? Excuse me. Based on everything that I've said, I absolutely think Marlon Moraes is worth a bet this weekend. Now, I don't love a bet on Marlon Moraes. I wouldn't recommend going too huge on him, because we are making an assumption that he's going to be able to keep this fight standing, and he is going to be able to pop back to his feet relatively quickly if he does get taken down. But based on the fact that he has the Matrix style vision and power to KO anyone dead at any second, based on the fact we know he's got excellent cardio, based on the fact we know he's a very high level Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, and based on the fact we know that training at Nova União, having the right body type for good takedown defense, and training with Frankie Edgar every day puts him in a strong position to have excellent takedown defense, even though we haven't seen it, makes him a very decent bet at these odds. In order to bet Marlon Moraes here, you have to give him at least a 65% chance of winning, I would say. Or no, that's been a bit too harsh. At least a 62% chance of winning, and I think that's fair. I definitely give him more than a 62% chance of winning. So I think Marlon Moraes is a decent bet. Now, guys, for these type of videos, we tend to see for these type of videos, a lot of people that don't usually watch these videos watch them, so I get a lot of extra comments and stuff. I'll get loads of comments telling me that Cejudo's going to knock Marlon Moraes out and I don't know what I'm talking about, etc, etc. Or I would say to you, if you are watching this video and you're of the opinion that that there is right or wrong in this sport, there is black and white, there are absolutes, I'm not the guy for you. You should definitely stop watching me, because I am not saying Marlon Moraes will beat Henry Cejudo. That is absolutely not what I'm saying. All I'm saying is, based on the odds, Marlon Moraes is the better bet. Based on everything we know, Marlon Moraes is the better bet. I am not saying Henry Cejudo can't knock him out. I am not saying Henry Cejudo can't take him down and ragdoll him for 25 minutes. Those are absolute possibilities, but the most likely outcome is that Moraes keeps the majority of this fight standing and either outstrikes Cejudo and outworks him over 25 minutes or KOs him dead. They are what I feel are the most likely outcomes, and since the odds are pretty generous, I definitely feel there's value there. I would not bet my house on Moraes winning. I would not sell my children. I would not bet the car. But Moraes is a good bet and Cejudo is a bad bet. That does not mean Cejudo can't win. That does not mean Moraes can't lose. All it means is the strong position to put your money in this weekend is on Marlon Moraes. If you put your money on Henry Cejudo, I understand you may feel Cejudo will win, but it's a bad bet and you are putting your money in a weak position. And that is pretty much it for this video, guys. I'll be back tomorrow with part 3. I hope you enjoyed it, and remember, if you want that live stream on fight day, hit the like button below. This video needs to get 400 likes, they all do. So you watching this video right now, hit the goddamn like button, and if you haven't already, please subscribe.
Too many thoughts on my mind, I can't sleep at night, so I just keep writing. I don't need no help, I don't need opinions, so don't waste my time then. I just been living online, my city don't show me no love, and that's fine. Fuck local radio stations, I got more plays than all of these rappers combined. I'm going again, I've been going in, I'm fed up with so many things, I gotta just let it all out. I'm talking about the shit they've been talking